I'd been sitting alone for nearly 20 minutes, pretending to read the menu while quietly watching life unfold around me. Couples laughed over appetizers, families celebrated birthdays, and friends filled the restaurant with easy conversations. Then the front door opened, and a young woman rushed out, tears streaming down her face. No one followed her. No one called her name. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, trying to wipe away her tears before anyone noticed. But everyone had already noticed. Most people simply looked away. I don't know what made me stand up that evening. Maybe it was because I knew what loneliness looked like. Maybe it was because years earlier, someone had once shown me kindness when I needed it most. I walked outside slowly and stopped a respectful distance away. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Would you mind if I sat here?" She looked up, surprised. For a second, I thought she'd tell me to leave. Instead, she gave a tired smile. I think I'd actually like that. Her name was Emily. Mine is Daniel. Neither of us knew that one simple question would completely change both of our lives. She took a deep breath before speaking. "I guess you saw everything. Only enough to know someone treated you badly." She laughed through her tears. That's one way to describe it. We sat on a small bench outside the restaurant while the evening breeze carried the sounds of traffic past us. After a few moments, she finally explained. Her co-workers had convinced her to try online dating again after nearly 3 years. They said this man was funny, successful, and incredibly kind. Instead, he spent the entire dinner talking about himself. He criticized the way she dressed, compared her to his ex-girlfriend, checked his phone every few minutes. Then, when the check arrived, he stood up and said he had forgotten something in his car. He never came back, leaving her alone with a $200 dinner bill. "I should have known," she whispered. "No. I always pick the wrong people." "No," I repeated. She looked at me. "The wrong people pick you. That's different." For the first time that evening, she smiled without forcing it. I asked if she'd eaten anything. She shook her head. I lost my appetite after the first 10 minutes. "Well," I said, standing, "I happen to know someone who deserves a decent dinner." She immediately reached for her purse. "I can't let you pay. I'm not offering because I think you need someone to rescue you." She tilted her head. "I'm offering because nobody should leave hungry after surviving a terrible date." She laughed again. A real laugh this time. We walked back inside. The hostess looked confused. "So, another table." I smiled. "If that's okay." Emily looked embarrassed. "The bill from before." "I've already taken care of it," I quietly said. She stared at me. "When?" "While you were outside." "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Tears filled her eyes again. "But thank you." This dinner felt completely different. There were no awkward silences. No pretending to impress each other. We talked about our families, favorite books, embarrassing childhood stories, and dreams we'd almost given up on. Emily worked as an elementary school teacher. She admitted she'd spent years buying school supplies for students whose families couldn't afford them, sometimes using her own grocery money. "You never tell anyone that, do you?" I asked. She shrugged. "They're kids." That simple answer told me more about her character than any dating profile ever could. As the evening ended, I asked if she'd let me drive her home. She hesitated. "I promise," I smiled, no disappearing to the parking lot. She laughed so hard that nearby diners looked over. The next morning, I expected that to be the end of the story. Instead, I received a text. "Thank you for reminding me there are still good people in the world." I smiled at my phone. We began meeting for coffee. Then walks through the park. Then volunteering together on weekends. One Saturday, we served meals at a homeless shelter. An elderly man refused his tray. I'm saving my place for someone who needs it more. Emily knelt beside him. You are someone who needs it. She stayed with him for nearly an hour until he finally accepted the meal. Watching her that afternoon changed something inside me. Most people are kind when others are watching. Emily was kind when nobody noticed. Months passed. We never rushed into anything. Our friendship became the strongest foundation either of us had ever experienced. One rainy afternoon, I finally asked why she'd stayed single for so long before that awful blind date. She became quiet. My fiancé died 5 years ago. I didn't interrupt. He was killed by a drunk driver 3 months before our wedding. She looked out the cafe window. I thought loving someone again would somehow betray him. I reached across the table. You honoring his memory doesn't mean your own life has to stop. She squeezed my hand. I think he would have liked you. I didn't know what to say. Sometimes silence is the kindest response. Nearly a year after our first meeting, Emily invited me to her school's family reading night. I expected to sit quietly in the audience. Instead, dozens of children ran toward her shouting, "Miss Emily." One little girl hugged her tightly. "My mom got a new job because you helped her." Another child proudly showed Emily a backpack. "You bought this for me." Parents thanked her. Teachers admired her. She introduced me simply as my friend Daniel. Oddly enough, hearing that made me happier than any fancy title ever could. Because friendship built on respect lasts. Love built on friendship lasts even longer. That Christmas, we visited the same restaurant where we'd first met. The hostess recognized us instantly. "Oh my goodness." She smiled. "You're the couple from the terrible blind date." Emily laughed. "I guess we are." The hostess admitted she'd watched everything happen that night. I hoped someone would help her. Emily looked at me. Someone did. After dinner, I asked if she'd like to take a walk. Snow had just begun falling. The city lights reflected off the sidewalks. We reached the same bench where we'd first spoken. "I've been thinking about this place," I said. "So have I." I took a small envelope from my coat. She looked confused. "This isn't a ring." She smiled. "Good. It's a letter." She opened it carefully. Inside were several handwritten pages. She read quietly while snowflakes landed on her scarf. When she finished, tears filled her eyes. The last sentence read, "The greatest thing that ever happened to me wasn't finding love. It was finding someone whose kindness made me want to become an even better person every single day." She folded the letter. I've never received anything more beautiful. I took one slow breath. "Emily." She already knew. "I love you." She smiled before I could say another word. "I've loved you for months." Then she kissed me beneath the falling snow. 2 years later, we returned to that restaurant again. This time with a little girl between us. Our adopted daughter, Lily. She had spent her early childhood moving from one foster home to another. Emily looked at me one evening and simply said, "If kindness changed our lives, maybe it can change hers too." She was right. Lily transformed our family just as much as we transformed hers. One afternoon, when Lily was 8 years old, she asked how Mommy and Daddy met. Emily smiled. "Your dad asked me one question." Lily looked at me. "What was it?" I smiled at both of them. I asked, "Mind if I sit here?" Lily frowned. "That's it." That was enough. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness opens the biggest door. Most people believed our story began with romance. They're wrong. It began with compassion. One stranger noticed another stranger hurting and chose not to walk away. In a world where people often scroll past pain, ignore tears, or assume someone else will help, humanity still begins the same way it always has, with one person willing to stop, one person willing to care, and one simple question spoken with genuine kindness. You never know whose worst day might become the first chapter of their happiest story simply because you chose to sit beside them instead of walking past.